The bell rang and echoed through the hallway, sharp and final, signaling the end of another evening class. Students stood quickly, folding notebooks, sliding phones into pockets, already thinking about dinner, traffic, and home. Within minutes, the room emptied, leaving behind the faint smell of coffee and the soft hum of fluorescent lights. Emily Carter remained at her desk as she always did. She liked the quiet after class. It gave her time to breathe. She stacked papers, straightened. Chairs erased the board with slow, practiced movements. Teaching adult students was different from teaching teenagers. These people carried lives with them. Jobs, divorces, regrets. Emily respected that as she reached for her bag. She felt it a presence that did not belong to the silence. She looked up. Daniel Brooks stood near the door, his hand resting on the strap of his bag, his posture unsure. He looked like someone waiting for permission to exist in the space. Emily's heart gave a small, unexpected jump. "Yes," she asked gently. "Did you need something, Daniel?" He hesitated, then nodded. "I had a question about my essay. Your comment on the second page." "Course," she said, motioning him closer. "Which part?" He stepped forward, keeping a careful distance, and pointed to a sentence she had underlined. She explained what she meant, that the line felt honest. That honesty mattered more than structure. That real writing came from truth. Daniel listened. Closely, his eyes steady, his attention complete. Not rushed, not distracted. "Thank you," he said, when she finished. "But no one's ever said that about my writing before." Emily smiled. "You have something worth saying." When he left, she sat back in her chair, surprised by the warmth that lingered in her chest. She shook her head slightly, as if to clear it. It was nothing. A good student. A kind moment. That was all. Emily was 41 years old. She had been married to Mark Carter for 16 years. They lived in a quiet suburb outside Boston, in a house they bought when life still felt like it was expanding. Mark worked long hours in project management. He was dependable, calm, and kind. They didn't fight, they didn't shout. They simply moved around each other, careful and distant, like roommates who shared history. The next week, Daniel waited. Again, this time, he asked about a book Emily had mentioned in class. They talked briefly about authors, about stories that stayed with you long after you finished reading. This conversation felt easy, too easy. When Daniel finally left, Emily noticed she was smiling. She told herself not to overthink it, but the pattern continued every week. Daniel stayed after class. Sometimes he had questions. Sometimes he just stood there until she noticed him. The talks grew longer, deeper. He spoke about growing up in Oregon, about leaving a job he hated, about a relationship that ended quietly but painfully. Emily listened, nodding, careful not to share too much of herself. Daniel was 32, quiet, thoughtful. He never flirted, never crossed a line. But he looked at her like her words mattered, like she mattered. Emily found herself sharing things she rarely said out loud. How she loved teaching but once dreamed of writing novels. How life didn't turn out badly, just differently. She avoided talking about her marriage, not because she was hiding it, but because she didn't know how to explain the emptiness without making it sound like a complaint. One evening, rain poured against the windows, and the building felt almost deserted. Daniel stayed later than usual. The hallway lights dimmed automatically, casting soft shadows on the walls. "I hope I'm not being inappropriate," Daniel said suddenly. "If I am, tell me." Emily's hand froze on her bag. "Why would you be?" "Because I wait," he said simply. "And because I look forward to these talks." Emily felt her chest tighten. She kept her voice steady. "We're just talking." "I know," he said quickly. "I just wanted to be honest." She nodded slowly. "We should be careful." "I agree." Neither of them moved right away. That night, Emily drove home in silence, the rain blurring the streetlights. At home, Mark was asleep on the couch, the TV murmuring softly. She covered him with a blanket and went upstairs alone. Lying in bed, she stared at the ceiling, her thoughts restless, her heart awake. The next class, Emily tried to change things. She answered Daniel's questions briefly. She packed up quickly. She avoided eye contact. Daniel noticed but said nothing. He left with the others. Emily felt an unexpected disappointment. At home, Mark asked how her class was going. She said, "Fine." The word felt empty. A week later, Daniel stayed again. "I didn't mean to make you uncomfortable," he said. Quietly, "I can stop staying after class." Emily looked at him, surprised by the thought. "No, that's not necessary. We just need boundaries." "I understand," he said. They spoke less that evening, but the silence between them felt louder than words. From then on, their conversations were shorter but heavier. Every word mattered. Every pause carried meaning. Emily felt seen in a way she hadn't felt in years. Daniel felt understood. One night, Daniel handed her his essay at the end of class. "This one's personal," he said. "I'd appreciate your thoughts." Emily read it later, alone in the empty classroom. It was about a man standing at a crossroad, knowing one choice would change everything. The story ended mid-sentence. Her hands trembled slightly as she set the paper down. The story felt too close. It's too real. She returned it the next week with careful comments. Encouraging, professional. Distant. Daniel nodded when he read them. "Thank you," he said softly. Emily began noticing small things she wished she didn't. The sound of his footsteps, the way he waited until everyone else left, the warmth she felt when she saw him, the guilt that followed. One evening, Daniel didn't stay. Emily felt an ache she hadn't expected. The following week, he waited again, standing near the door, uncertain. On the last class before winter break, the building was nearly empty. Then, hallway lights flickered softly. "Emily," Daniel said, using her first name for the first time. "If this is wrong, tell me to leave." She looked at him, her heart pounding. "I don't want to hurt you," he continued, "or put you in a difficult position. I just needed you to know this matters to me." Emily swallowed hard. "Matters to me too." The truth hung between them, fragile and dangerous. When Daniel finally left, Emily stayed behind, sitting alone in the quiet classroom. Staring at the unfinished sentence in his essay, she knew then that something had already changed, and there was no easy way back. Emily Carter walked into the classroom that evening, feeling a weight she couldn't name. It had been weeks since Daniel had stayed late after class, and the empty hallway felt larger than usual. The fluorescent lights buzzed softly above her, but the silence in the room pressed closer than the walls themselves. She placed her bag on the desk and started stacking papers, trying to ignore the flutter in her chest. Even after all this time, she couldn't stop thinking about him, about his honesty, his quiet attention, the way he seemed to see her in ways Mark never had. When the door opened, Daniel stepped inside. He paused for a second, watching her, hesitant, as if he were unsure whether he should approach. Emily's heart gave a small leap. She tried to hide. "Daniel," she said softly. Hi, he replied. There was a nervousness in his voice she hadn't noticed before. I wanted to talk." Emily nodded, gesturing to the empty seats at the back. He moved closer, but not too close, as though they both knew invisible lines existed between them. They talked first about the assignment, briefly, then drifted to other topics, childhood memories, favorite books, places they had lived. Emily realized that he wasn't just filling time. He shared things he didn't tell anyone else, and she felt privileged to hear them. When Daniel handed her a folded page one evening after class, Emily barely recognized her own pulse. "I wrote this for the assignment," he said, eyes avoiding hers, "but I think it's really for you." Emily waited until she was alone before opening it. The story inside was a mirror of her life, a woman teaching others to find their voices, while her own voice was lost in quiet nights at home. A man who had learned to listen because no one had listened to him before. The ending wasn't finished, but it didn't need to be. Emily felt exposed in a way she hadn't felt in years. Her chest tightened, and her hands trembled slightly. It wasn't just the writing, it was what it represented. Understanding. Care, connection, something she hadn't realized she was craving so deeply. The following week, Lee tried to maintain distance. She reminded herself of Mark, of her marriage, of the vows she had said 16 years ago. But Daniel had a way of slipping into her thoughts effortlessly. Even when she avoided his gaze, her mind traced the curve of his shoulders, the warmth in his eyes when he listened. The conversations became shorter, but every word carried weight. They spoke less about assignments and more about life, loneliness, regret, longing. They didn't name it, but the tension between them was undeniable. One night, Emily told him, "Firmly, we need to stop meeting alone. It's becoming something it shouldn't." Daniel looked disappointed but nodded. "I understand," he said. "I care about you, Emily. I would never ask you to leave your husband. I just needed you to know how I feel." Emily closed her eyes, the words settling like stones in her chest. She had never expected honesty to feel so dangerous. That night, when she returned home, she didn't go directly to bed. She sat in her car, gripping the steering wheel. Thinking about him, thinking about Mark. Thinking about how a simple conversation could unearth feelings she thought were long buried. Mark had been kind, always, but distant. Their marriage hadn't been unhappy, just quiet. Meals in front of the TV, conversations about bills and schedules, laughter that had faded over the years. Emily had tried to revive it, tried to explain the silence, suggested counseling. Mark had listened, promised to try, and for a few weeks things seemed to improve. But one night he forgot their anniversary. A small thing, but enough to reopen the ache she had been hiding. Emily found herself sitting in the car again after class, staring at the empty hallway, knowing Daniel would appear any second. When he did, she didn't hesitate. "I'm not." "Okay," she said. Neither was he. They went for coffee, public safe, but the conversation dove deeper than it ever had before. Emily spoke about her marriage, about the quiet nights, about feeling invisible even when she was beside someone who loved her. Daniel spoke about waiting his whole life to be seen the way she saw him. Their words were careful, yet they stripped away the barriers they had built around themselves. That night, she didn't return home right away. Not because she wanted anything physical, nothing physical happened, but because something inside her had shifted. A line had been crossed in thought, in longing, in the way her heart felt awake again. The world seemed sharper, brighter, more real. She had opened a door she could never fully close. Days passed. Daniel eventually left the class without explanation. He didn't say goodbye. Emily stood alone in the now empty classroom, holding the last paper he had submitted. On the final page, he had written, "Some lessons stay with you long after the class ends." Life continued. Emily tried to refocus on Mark, on home, on routine. They tried again, quietly, slowly, in ways that were familiar. Sometimes, when the classroom was empty and the lights buzzed overhead, she remembered Daniel, remembered the ache, the connection, the intensity that had felt almost dangerous in its beauty. She had resisted, had chosen restraint over desire, and that decision had hurt more than she could have imagined. Months later, Emily still felt the pull of what might have been. The longing lingered quietly, hidden beneath the surface of her daily life. A student might wait after class, and for a moment her chest would tighten. Her mind would drift back to Daniel. She never saw him again, never heard from him. And yet, the memory remained vivid, a reminder that some connections, fleeting and fragile, can change a person forever. Emily realized that love isn't always about beginnings or endings. Sometimes it is about what you choose not to do, what lines you refuse to cross, and the quiet ache that follows restraint. The story of her and Daniel ended not with romance, not with heartbreak, but with understanding, the kind that leaves a permanent imprint on the heart. She learned that some feelings, no matter how deeply felt, are meant to be remembered, not acted upon, even now, years later. When the classroom is empty and the air smells faintly of chalk and coffee, Emily can almost see him standing by the door, waiting. And she remembers that moment perfectly. The weight of honesty, the intensity of being seen, and the bittersweet reality that some lessons, like some loves, never truly end.